We've all heard about the Cold War, with its constant mention in modern media, and with current events it's getting called back to more and more often. But over the course of the war, which was not much of an all-out physical conflict, there were a fair amount of tactics and events which occurred that you may not know about, and some of them can be pretty crazy. So I locked Aidan in the basement and started whipping him aggressively, and instructed him to find us some interesting yet weird Cold War facts. And in this video, we will be going over 6 strange or odd Cold War facts that further prove something that we already know. The world is a very strange place. Let's begin with Oleg Li Allen. Oleg Li Allen was disguised as a Russian trade delegate in Britain. In 1971, he was arrested when he was found to be swerving dangerously and driving under the influence. He was clearly not the smartest spy which Russia had at the time, considering his response to the police upon being apprehended was to exclaim, "I am a KGB officer." As standard for British police, they didn't believe this. Once in court, it turned out he was in fact a KGB spy. However, working for the KGB clearly wouldn't have been that good, as he eventually defected over to Britain, leaking valuable Russian information, which resulted in the expulsion of 105 Soviet officials who were spies for the KGB. He literally turned on the KGB because he got done for drunk driving in the UK, and his defection got the charges dropped. Li Allen was given a new identity and lived out the rest of his life in Britain until his death in 1995. Next up, the 1988 Black Sea incident. If you're nearing the end of a long and drawn out proxy war, a tip for most people would probably be to not sail into part of the sea owned by your enemy. This was something that the US Navy seemed to have not figured out when the USS Yorktown and USS Charon entered Russian waters in Crimea. Unsurprisingly, 2 Russian ships were sent out to make them leave Soviet waters. Naturally, the American ships refused to leave and started heading towards Crimea again, although most of this came about due to some confusion over America not recognizing the Soviets owning as much water as they perhaps did. Not wanting to fire missiles, the Russians resorted to the next best thing, ramming them. The affair went on until all 4 ships had sustained damage. This may have been a funny sight, however if a missile had been fired instead, there's every chance the Cold War could have kicked off into all-out conflict. I don't know what you're on about, this was one of the greatest naval battles of all time. Number 3. The Gazenko Affair. It can be argued that the Cold War began in either US or Russia, but there is another argument that it began in Canada. I mean, of all places, come on, that's pretty mad. This one is down to a man named Igor Sergeyevich Gazenko. Only 3 days after the end of the Second World War, on the 5th of September 1945, he defected to Canada with 109 documents on the topic of the USSR's activities around espionage in the West. This caused Canada's Prime Minister to call for an investigation into espionage in Canada. Not only did the documents show information about espionage in the West, it also detailed the fact that the Soviets were attempting to steal nuclear secrets and also attempted the method of planting sleeper agents in the West. 20 Canadian suspects were tried between 1947 and 1948 for espionage, and 10 were convicted, receiving punishments from prison time to fines. As you can imagine, this didn't make the Soviet Union particularly popular in the West. Number 4. The Madman Theory. One of America's theories that not everybody knows about is the Madman Theory. Often associated with President Richard Nixon, the main idea behind this theory was that if Richard Nixon was portrayed as a maniac who would be willing to press the big red button to launch nuclear missiles at whoever it may be needed for at any point, it'd make negotiation and communication a better alternative to subtle antagonizing and provoking. The main logic behind the idea was the fact that if every hostile nation saw the US president as being unpredictable and a threat, then they wouldn't want to even hint towards firing their own nuclear weapons due to the possible implications. Although this was a strange tactic, it seems to have worked due to the fact that obviously no nuclear weapons ever hit mainland America, apart from their own nuclear tests. However, Richard Nixon wasn't just a controversial character worldwide, but also as the leader of his own country. In the 50s, he'd already acquired the nickname Tricky Dick, and during his presidential terms in the late 1960s to the early to mid 1970s, he'd certainly picked up some morally dubious methods. And as a result of the Watergate scandal in 1974, he became the first and only US president to resign from office. Number 5. The blackmail of Indonesia's first president. In 1945, after leading an independence movement to stop the Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia, a man by the name of Sukarno became Indonesia's first president. He had an overwhelming reputation for loving his nation, but as well as this, he had the other reputation of loving women even more. Throughout the Cold War, Indonesia played an important role. This was down to the fact that the nation was vital strategically, but as well as this, it was also the location of the largest party of communists outside the USSR. Both the KGB and CIA wanted to find a way to blackmail the leader into joining their side of the conflict. It was the Americans who decided to create a fake pornographic film of the leader to blackmail him, although the main issue they faced was that they couldn't find the lookalike to perform in the porno, so they had to resort to creating a full face mask of the man. This was possibly one of the strangest but also best blackmail attempts in modern history. The KGB attempted a similar thing, except their porno of the Indonesian president was real. In the end, the biggest problem either side faced was the simple fact that Sukarno actually didn't care all that much. After all, over the course of his lifetime, he had 9 wives, and some of them overlapped. So blackmail on this particular bullet point was a stupid idea before the inception. Finally, number 6, and believe us, we left the best until last, because we're talking about Operation Acoustic Kitty. I know it sounds mad, but I promise you it's even madder. In the 1960s, the CIA decided to proceed on a new method of gathering information and spying on possible KGB agents. Operation Acoustic Kitty is essentially what it says on the tin. Cats were implanted with a microphone and a radio transmitter. Through this surgery, it would allow for the cat to be placed near the suspect or target and gather the information, costing $20 million, which would have been roughly 189 million in today's currency. It would be eventually deemed a complete failure due to the fact that the CIA realised that it was incredibly hard to train a cat to gather the information which they wanted to get. However, it could also be because the only time a cat was ever deployed in Operation Acoustic Kitty failed completely. The first mission of Acoustic Kitty was to gather information on 2 men who were outside the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. Sadly, almost immediately after being released to go and fetch the information, the cat was allegedly hit and killed straight away by a taxi, deeming the operation a complete failure. If it didn't come down to the fact that it was incredibly hard to get a cat to do what you want, then this could have been an incredible technique at stopping KGB spies. But above all else, I think it's genuinely hilarious that the CIA sat there after conceptualizing this absurd plan and went, I think we're onto something. And that brings us to the end of 6 odd Cold War facts. Naturally, we hope that you enjoyed. Be sure to comment any more topics you'd like us to cover down in the comments section, and if you're new, please hit subscribe. It goes a long way in helping us out. You can also follow us on social media via the links in the description, but above all else, we hope to see you all very soon with another video. So until next time, please take care and goodbye.